Hello, my name is Larry Cohen. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist in Washington, D.C., where I specialize in helping people struggling with social anxiety and related problems. I co-founded and co-chair the National Social Anxiety Center, which is a network of many regional clinics around the United States, all dedicated to providing and fostering effective evidence-based services for people with social anxiety. Since 1990, I've been directing the Social Anxiety Help Clinic here in Washington, D.C., where we have helped more than 1,000 people with social anxiety in both individual and group cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. This is the first in a three-part series on using external mindfulness and curiosity training to help you overcome your social anxiety. I have a question for you. When you're feeling socially anxious, what are you paying attention to? In other words, when you're really uncomfortable interacting with others, or being observed by others, or perhaps simply being around others in certain settings, what is it you're focusing on? Most of the time when we're socially anxious, we're focused quite internally. We're self-monitoring, in other words. Perhaps we're self-monitoring our physical anxiety symptoms themselves because we're concerned that maybe we're blushing or sweating or that our voice might be shaking or that our hands might be trembling, and we fear that these symptoms might be noticed by the people we're around and that they would be judging us negatively because of them. We're likely self-monitoring our performance in the conversation or the other activity, perhaps having a stream of running commentary that's quite negative in our minds, critiquing what we said and how we're coming across, thinking that it was stupid or that it was uninteresting or that we don't know what to say. Maybe we're desperately seeking to script what to say next in the conversation, sort of like a playwright writing the lines of a play while the performance is going on, out of fear that otherwise we wouldn't have anything to say, or that we would say it awkwardly, or that it would be uninteresting, and that it would perhaps be a stupid thing to say. Finally, we might be thinking about, what is this person thinking of me? How are they reacting to me? What kind of impression am I making in their minds? And even that's a form of self-monitoring, because we don't really know what other people are thinking and feeling. All we really know is our own thoughts and feelings about what other people are thinking and feeling about us. So we're very much in our heads when we're socially anxious. All this self-monitoring takes us out of the moment and puts us into our heads. Why are we doing that? Well, it's a safety-seeking behavior. It's something that we rely on, a crutch that we lean on too much to help us get through a situation that we view as really risky. What are the risks? When we're socially anxious, we see the risks as being embarrassed, or getting judged or evaluated negatively, being criticized, perhaps rejected. Those are scary things, of course, and so it kind of makes sense that we would want to monitor how we think we're coming across so that we come across better and we don't risk these bad things from happening. It makes sense, except for one thing. It doesn't work. In fact, it's worse than not working. Self-monitoring actually makes us come across worse. Why? Because self-monitoring distracts us from the persons, the conversation, and the activity. Self-monitoring makes us self-conscious and more anxious, and therefore negatively impacts our performance. So although we self-monitor to try to come across better, self-monitoring makes us come across worse and also makes us feel worse in the process. One way to illustrate how self-monitoring has a negative impact on social anxiety is using the example of an actor with stage fright. Stage fright, by the way, is a type of social anxiety. Imagine an actor who's been rehearsing her role in the play for months, and it's now opening night. So of course she's nervous about how it's going to go. She's concerned about how well will she perform her role. What will the audience think of her acting and her performance? What will the audience think about the play? What will the theater critics in the audience write up about her play and her performance in the media in the coming days? All those things are natural concerns that are making her rather anxious. All of that makes sense. The problem is how she reacts to her anxiety. She relies heavily on the safety-seeking behavior of self-monitoring, so that while she is performing, she is critiquing her performance in her mind. She is criticizing how she said the last line. Maybe she got the words a little messed up. Maybe her intonation or mannerisms weren't quite right. Maybe the staging isn't the way it should be. And she's very concerned about how the audience may be reacting to her. All of this stuff is going on in her mind. She's very much in her head and not fully immersed in the role. It doesn't take a theater expert to realize that all of this self-monitoring is going to backfire on a poor actor. It's going to negatively impact her performance. She won't do as well because she's very much in her mind rather than being immersed in her role. The self-monitoring distracts her from her role. It causes her to feel more anxiety and self-consciousness, and so it hurts her performance. The alternative to self-monitoring that helps you overcome your social anxiety is called external mindfulness. It means getting out of your head and into the moment being the conversation or other activity and the persons we're interacting with. I emphasize external mindfulness because commonly nowadays, when people hear the word mindfulness, they think about meditation. Meditation is not mindfulness. Meditation is simply one way to practice mindfulness. And in meditation, we're practicing internal mindfulness because we're paying attention to things going on inside of our mind and in our body. Perhaps we're focusing on our breathing while we meditate, or other physical sensations we're experiencing. Perhaps we're focusing on a silent mantra that we're repeating in our minds, or an image that we conjure up in our minds. All of this is mindfulness, but it is internally focused mindfulness, which is really helpful for some things. But research shows it's not particularly helpful to overcome social anxiety. Why? Because when we're socially anxious, we're already too internally focused as it is. Now, granted, meditation helps us learn to be internally focused without judgment. That's good. Because when we're socially anxious and we're internally focused, it's full of negative judgment toward ourselves and fearing negative judgment from others. So meditation is useful in that sense, but much more importantly, we need to learn to get out of our heads and focus externally on what is going on in the conversation, the activity, and the people we're with. That's called external mindfulness. And one way to illustrate that is in the following example. Imagine it's a beautiful day outside and you're with a very good friend at an outdoor cafe that you really enjoy. Lots of other people enjoy that cafe too, so it's quite crowded. And so there are lots of sights and sounds that might distract you from time to time. There's the sound and sights of other patrons at nearby tables, of pedestrians on the sidewalk adjacent to your table, and of cars whizzing by in the nearby street. There's all sorts of things that could distract you and do occasionally distract you, no matter how good a time you're having otherwise with your friend and the food. But most of us are rather good at noticing the distraction and then simply returning our attention back to the friend and the conversation and the food to get back into the moment, in other words. That's called defusing from those distractions, treating them like the background noise that they really are, not paying attention to them, and then refocusing mindfully with interest on what's going on in the moment that's important, namely our friend and our conversation with our friend, as well as the food that we're sharing. This is what we want to do when we're socially anxious, to get externally mindful, to focus with interest on the persons, the activity, the conversation, and to defuse, to detach, to distance ourselves from our thoughts, our feelings, and our symptoms. Now, we can't turn off our thoughts, feelings, and symptoms any more than we can turn off all that background noise at a cafe. But by not paying attention to them, by being aware of them, but then gently returning our attention back to the conversation, the person, the activity, then those thoughts and feelings and symptoms don't bother us very much. And we're able to feel less anxious and to engage in the conversation or activity much more naturally. Now, this is rather hard to do when we're anxious. Why? Because we've trained ourselves unintentionally over many years to be internally focused, as I said, when we're anxious. And now we want to train ourselves to be externally focused. That takes practice. The good news is you don't have to be 100% perfect in mindfulness to overcome your social anxiety. In fact, perfect mindfulness is, in my opinion, a fluke. It's not a realistic goal. Our brains did not evolve to be mindful. To the contrary, our brains evolved to be quite distractible so that we can be aware of potential external danger all around us. Maybe there's a saber-toothed tiger behind us or a cave lion. We have to be distractible to be aware of things outside of the conversation in order to protect ourselves. Well, that worked well in ancient times, but it's to our detriment now during social interaction. So we need to train our brains to do something that doesn't come naturally, to be mindfully focused on the external moment and to defuse from distracting thoughts, feelings, and symptoms, treating them just like unimportant background noise. I call this being absorbed in the conversation, the activity, getting lost in the conversation and activity, being immersed in it. That's what we're aiming toward. Not 100% mindfulness, maybe 75% mindfulness. But in addition, the goal is to be aware of the 25 or so percent of the time that we are in our heads when we're focused on our thoughts, feelings, or symptoms, and to be able to acknowledge that and to gently return our attention back to the person, the conversation, and the activity. So again, the goal is not perfection. The goal is being overwhelmingly mindful, focused on the conversation, the activity, and the persons, and being aware when we're not so we can gently return our attention. Now, I emphasize the word gently because so often people who are initially training themselves to be more mindful get rather frustrated or upset with themselves when they notice that they're distracted, when they notice that they're in their heads. Getting frustrated and upset at ourselves actually only ends up making us less mindful, so that's not useful. That's why I encourage you to simply notice when you're distracted and to then gently, without frustration, return your attention back to the conversation, the persons, the activity, and the moment. This takes practice. In the next 2 sessions, I will be training you in something called curiosity. Curiosity means taking interest in. It's a core part of mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't mean only to pay attention, because we could be paying attention to something while our mind is full of judgments, judging ourselves and judging how we think others may be judging us. And although we're paying attention somewhat, that's not being very mindful. Mindfulness means paying attention to the present moment without judgment and instead with curiosity, taking interest in the present moment rather than in evaluating ourselves or trying to guess how the other person may be evaluating us. I call this curiosity training. In the next 2 sessions, I will take you through a number of exercises to help you become more curious when you're experiencing social anxiety, to help you pay attention with interest to the persons, the conversation, the activity, and to notice any distracting thoughts, feelings, and symptoms you may be having, but to gently return your attention back to the present moment, again with interest, with curiosity. In addition to those curiosity training exercises in the next 2 sessions, I will suggest a variety of things that you can do as self-help homework where you can practice curiosity training on your own, ideally daily. This is tough work, but you'll find it to be very rewarding, I believe. I'm quite optimistic that it will help you greatly in overcoming your social anxiety. I hope you attend the next 2 sessions. Thank you.